In a previous module, we left off here considering the idea of how we integrate what we know about best practices of having access to a student's FBA to help us understand the function of their behavior. And in understanding the function of the behavior, we might make a table like this to ourselves of what are the antecedent things I could add, or the instructional strategies I could add, and consequence manipulations, or ABC, right? So an ABC analysis. And in this case, you're filling these boxes, if you're using this in practice, with evidence-based practices from some of those tools we've been using in this course. So we left off here, and what we're shifting to now is thinking, so we select some of the things that we're going to do, right, for our programming, and we start to develop our goals for the student based on what we're also learning about the components that need to be present for an IEP when we're writing goals, which is to say we need to have, because we like to have acronyms, ABCD, which is audience, behavior, condition, and degree of criterion, or how well the student's going to do something for the annual IEP goal. And then we'll have benchmarks or objectives breaking down what we think they should be doing in terms of progress along the way if they're making adequate progress toward their annual IEP goal in a specific skill area. So in this case, we know that the student that we were working on, so if we back up for 1 second, just so we remind ourselves what we're talking about, is that Adam was a student that we said that the function of his behavior was to obtain access to desired outcomes, because what he was told is to wait, and he would have a tantrum, and that tantrum served to get what he wanted when he wanted it in order to obtain access to the desired activity or item at the time when he wanted it, rather than wait the way he was told by teachers, right? So we spent some time thinking that's the function of his behavior, and we came up with some of these evidence-based practices or strategies or techniques that we could potentially develop a program or plan for Adam. And in the case of Adam, we want to start thinking, well, what is it we're trying to work on? And we would develop a goal that might say, you know, given a request from a teacher to wait for the next task, Adam will, and then depending on what we select here, say, use his visual schedule and his, whatever it is, request from the teacher to engage in that activity within a certain number of seconds, which would be waiting. And then once he waits for a certain amount of seconds, we would say that he might receive something, if that's part of what we're building here, and then what it is that he would receive, so that we're able to say that the goal for Adam is focusing on the desired behavior that he's engaging in, not necessarily the reduction of his undesirable behavior, which is throwing tantrums. Although, if you write a very good goal, the hope is that you would have a reduction in the undesired behavior. But it's important to think that we're writing goals from a pro-social approach, which is the desired behaviors, rather than decreasing the likelihood. We don't want to write goals that says Adam will not throw a temper tantrum, because the truth is not a temper tantrum could be any number of things. Not doing a temper tantrum could be running away, right? So we want to make sure that we're clearly saying what it is we want him to do. We want him to hear the request from the teacher, that the request is to wait. The teacher should hopefully say how long the waiting is. Adam should let the teacher know he heard the request, engage in the requested activity, which is waiting. And when he does that, what will he receive? He'll receive the desired outcome, potentially, for a little while. That's the replacement behavior, until the very end point where he no longer necessarily gets the desired outcome, but maybe something else like a token reinforcement, something like that, right? But what we're trying to shift to thinking about is, because then we're going to start monitoring progress. This example just shows you the visual of frequency of physical aggression. That's not what we're talking about with Adam just yet, but it's a reminder of how graphs can look and how they can help us determine whether or not our intervention and instruction is effective. So we should always have graphs that have a title. In this case, it says the frequency of physical aggression. So that tells me I have a frequency count and we're looking at physical aggression. In this case, you should also always have the dimension of behavior, or how much the something is that you're measuring, if it's reading fluency or number of math problems or number of behaviors a student's engaging in, going on the y-axis, so the amount of something, and on the x-axis is the passage of time, or the times that you observed something. In this case, we also see that there are points here, data points, and then this is a phase change line, which suggests this is the student's baseline performance. I have this line here, which tells me that something has changed, and now we're doing an intervention. And over here, you're able to see that now we have all of these data points, and the data points look a little different, and I would be looking at these data points to say, is my intervention appropriate, and should I keep doing it? Or is it not? Now, in theory, if I'm looking at this example and not knowing anything about the student or what we're really doing, I can just see if this is the number of times they engage in physical aggression, I can see that on whatever this date is, there were 5 occurrences of physical aggression. Then there appears to be an intervention phase line here. So now we have an intervention, and I can see it's 2, it's 1, it's 2, it's 3, it's 1. So far, it looks like potentially a decrease in the physical aggression. But over here, we have some more physical aggression, so I wouldn't feel confident in saying this intervention, whatever it is working. Let's go back to talking about Adam for a second, who engages in tantrums when he's told to wait for something. And when he engages in tantrums, the function of that behavior is he gets what he wants. So in this case, let's just say this is the percent of observed intervals where Adam is engaged in the desired behavior. We're going to make it really simple just to say that means that what it is there are interval recording rather than every occurrence. And we see that Adam's really engaging in about 20%. And we have a goal maybe of 100% in this case, just because we're thinking about it, we're simplifying it down. If I saw this flat line of data, I would say Adam is not responding to my intervention or my instruction because nothing has changed about his behavior, and yet the expectation is something should change about his behavior. If we actually look at something when let's say this is maybe, for example, his baseline data, when we say we didn't change anything other than collect data, we're trying to understand what his baseline is for throwing tantrums when he's asked to wait to engage in a desired activity. And in this case, we can see it's not changing, and this is the amount of times he's engaging in it. But if I were to look at it this way, I could see phase lines and say maybe this is his baseline, and I started something, so maybe I made a change to something in the antecedent. And I kept collecting data. And I can see after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 occurrences here, 5 occurrences, that it's still pretty flat, right? So something about what I did in terms of manipulating the antecedent did not have the desired effect on Adam's performance. So when we think about IEP goals and collecting progress monitoring data and then having those checks for how students are doing, those progress reports, it's really important to not just sort of engage in the process in terms of being like, well, here's Adam's data. If you really look at it, if I did this over 6 or 7 weeks, let's say, and I see this is flat, nothing has changed, that's a problem, and that means that I need to change something about his intervention or instruction. And in our next module, we'll talk about intensifying interventions and how we go about doing it. For the purpose of today, we're just thinking when you see something like this, and you know progress is not being made, you need to make a change to your instruction. So you'll draw a phase line and say, well, maybe I'll go back to, for example, thinking, when I made a change and had predictable routines and I gave him choices, it didn't change the behavior. So maybe now I need to start teaching him some things and also having some consequence manipulation. And so then I draw my phase line, I make those changes, and I keep collecting data. In this case, let's just say I see a slight change in these behaviors, but not enough for me to say he's going to meet his goal. So then I might still say something that I did in this change appears to have at least changed that behavior for the better. But now I have to decide, does he need more of one of those things in order to start to get closer to meeting what his annual goal is? And that's how you begin to think about taking all of these pieces together to be able to start thinking about how you make instructional decisions once you're already working with the student on a particular intervention.